The story of Little Sucker Thumb by Dr. Heinrich Hoffmann is a cautionary tale about a boy called Conrad, who's warned by his mother not to suck his thumbs while she's out. Of course, it wouldn't be a cautionary tale if Conrad did what his mother told him. The thumb goes in, and suddenly the great long red-legged scissor man bursts through the door. Clearly Dr. Hoffmann wasn't suggesting that children who suck their thumbs should be mutilated. I think most people would agree that would be a rather excessive punishment. But many people seem to feel that eternal torture in the blistering fires of hell is quite a reasonable punishment for not believing in a God that refuses to give evidence of its own existence. Now, before I start talking about hell, it's important to point out that biblical scholars have shown that the whole concept of hell, as it's spoken about today by many modern Christians, is an amalgamation of other earlier terms and concepts from around the world. The word Sheol in the Old Testament, which was replaced by the word hell in much later translations, simply meant grave, and had nothing to do with any notion of an afterlife. Gehenna, or the Hinnom Gulch, was literally a burning rubbish dump just outside Jerusalem in biblical times, into which the corpses of poor people and sinners were often thrown. Then we also have various borrowings from Greek mythology and Norse mythology, from which the actual word hell originated. Anyway, I've often heard it stated that the God of the Bible will abandon those who don't believe in it to this relatively recently conceived place of eternal torture. Now, I can't imagine eternity. I don't think the human brain can, but I've heard several variations on the following description, which attempts to give a glimpse of what that unimaginable length of time would feel like. Picture a solid bronze planet as big as the sun. Every century, a bird flies past, brushing its wing once against the planet as it does so. When the bird's wing has eventually worn the planet down to nothing, that will be the end of just the first day of eternity. Now that first day sounds long enough to spend in torment to me. Sidney Lumet's film 12 Angry Men follows 12 jurors as they discuss the case of a teenager accused of murder. It's an outstanding drama that examines morals and ethics while refreshingly making no reference to anyone believing or not believing in gods. At a point where they're about equally divided over the verdict, Lee J. Cobb's character admits wanting to kill the teenager by pulling the switch on the electric chair himself. On hearing this, Henry Fonda's character looks at him and expresses his disgust, calling him a sadist. For me, a God who would abandon atheists not just to something as comparatively fleetingly horrific as the electric chair, but to eternal torture, would be infinitely more sadistic and vindictive than Lee J. Cobb's character. Of course, some theists say that going to hell would be the atheist's choice, not God's. Firstly, no one would choose eternal torture. No one would choose the most extreme suffering imaginable. Secondly, if God is omnipotent, he has the power to retrieve anyone from hell. An omnipotent being who would choose not to retrieve people from eternal torture is one who is content for them to suffer eternal torture. That's not a God of merciful love, let alone infinite love. Only an unjust God would hide his presence from people, then leave them to suffer in hell for not believing. The Bible tells us that even the disciple Thomas didn't believe in Jesus' resurrection, but it also says that he was given proof. If that's true, then why isn't the same proof available for me? I didn't choose to be born into a world where there would be no convincing evidence of a God, and since it's no more within my choice to believe in gods than it is to believe in winged horses, if there is an all-knowing, all-powerful God and I'm bound for hell, it would mean that that God allowed my creation, knowing that hell would be my final destiny. In other words, I was created already doomed. A third point that's always interested me is that although some theists excuse God's lack of intervention with crime and disease on earth by saying it would be going against man's free will, they seem to have no problem with the idea of millions of people having their free will annihilated in an afterlife, which would stretch on for eternity. The afterlife is a conveniently untestable realm where you could say anything happens. If a God only intervenes in the realm that by definition no living person's had experience of, then we have no evidence that a God intervenes at all, whether here on earth or in posthumous judgment. Now, there are some people who call themselves Christians who seem to love telling atheists they're going to hell. How they square their enjoyment of the thought of others suffering with the whole ethos of Christianity, I don't know. I think it's fair to say that they're not really Christians at all. Genuine Christians disassociate themselves from them. But it would feel like progress if they realised that telling a person who doesn't believe in hell that they're going to hell is about as futile as telling them Santa won't bring them any presents. You can't feel threatened by something you don't believe in. I believe that most Christians and atheists love and cherish the people around them based on their behaviour rather than on their views about God's existence. But this leads me to what I see as an insurmountable paradox involved in the belief in heaven and hell, and that is, How could heaven be experienced by anyone who knew their loved ones were in hell? If I was a devout Christian destined for heaven, the knowledge that any of those I loved had been banished to hell would haunt me and leave me in a psychological hell, separating me from the experience of heaven. The only way I see to get around this paradox would be for the biblical God to hide its tracks by keeping the knowledge of who had been sent to hell from those who enter heaven. And if the Bible is true, the God it describes does seem to be rather good at withholding important knowledge from people. I think the popular concept of hell is full of holes. It's concerned with physical experiences of pain in a non-physical realm. Its existence doesn't tally with the existence of a just omnipotent God. It would present an insoluble paradox for people sent to heaven. It would drive you irretrievably mad within a very short space of time. Look at the psychotic behaviour that quickly emerges in animals confined too harshly. So eternal torment would also be pointless. Most basically, it's a mistranslation of the Bible's original meaning. I imagine that for those who really believe there's literally such a place or thing as hell, it might well loom very large in their lives and influence a lot of their reasoning. Like someone with an intense phobia of heights or spiders or buttons or kittens, they might well find it impossible to imagine what it's like not to live without those anxious thoughts. That's the real tragedy to me, that some lives are immobilised by the fear of this place, which is a concept constructed by humans that has absolutely no evidence behind it. If you're ruled by dread of going to hell, study the cultural evolution of the concept in the cold light of day, and it might unravel before your eyes. I don't believe hell exists. I truly believe that when we die, there's nothing. Some people say it doesn't make sense that there's nothing after death. They can't imagine there being nothing. But large chunks of nothingness happen for us every night when we sleep.